Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 155, and today I am focusing on Evil Nightmares, the debut full-length album from Italian retro, new wave, or traditional heavy metal band Ruler. And it was released originally back in April 27th of 2012 through My Graveyard Production, which was, of course, is a Italian record label, which has also reissued a couple of strong Fistness albums. I think pretty much their entire catalog. So that's all you need to know there about them. But this is their debut album. So, Ruler. These guys are based out of Milan, Lombardy, Italy, and were formed back in 2010, and this is their debut full-length album. So, let me get into at least the information, besides the fact that I'll even get into more information about the band after the review in terms of what they released afterwards, because I don't know, you may or may not be familiar with these guys, but I'll get to a little bit about also within this video my sort of at least history or time at least of just basically spending with this album in a way of just basically my relationship, I guess you can say, with this particular album from Ruler here. So let me get into, of course, just the overall background and the recording process, or you know, just that overall information about Evil Nightmares here. So, this album was recorded at Elnor Studio in Magnago, Italy, Milano, Italy, or whatever, you know. It was recorded there. Again, it's a city, I believe, in Italy. Again, it was recorded at least at this studio from at least January to February of 2012. It was mixed by Mattia Stancio. Hope I pronounced his name correctly. And the album was mastered by Luca Martello in March of 2012 at the H Sound Mastering in Alicante, Spain. And of course, the album was, of course, then finally, and I was also, I'm even skipping over the artist here. Again, the guy who did the artwork for this album, it was actually done by the late Andrea Bovara. And of course, and also handled by Simone Anselmi. Again, I'm reading off the actual back of the booklet here of my copy of the album. So there we go. It was handled by them, but Andrea Bovara, sadly again, had passed away back in 2014. But he's right now on Metal Archives are actually listing him as the sole artist, but really there's a secondary person that helped on this album as well, that being Simone Anselmi. So there we go. But eventually the album would of course be released through My Graveyard Productions on April 27th of 2012, which makes this album pretty much now a 7-year-old album. And since April 27th is basically Wednesday, it pretty much reached its 10th anniversary. So 10 years old, which is another reason why I chose this album. So here we go. Here we go to, of course, Evil Nightmares, since I've already basically ran through at least the overall recording information, you know, everything about that. So let me get into also slightly, I guess, the background at least, or just the information of the members on the album. Again, on vocals, we have Daniele DFE Valentini. Fucked up there. He's the singer here. We also have on guitars is Macchia Baldoni. On drums, we have Cesario Alcaro. I hope I pronounced all that correctly. Again, drums, and of course, Paolo Pantagia. Hope I pronounced his name correctly there. He is the bass player, so there's at least your lineup for the album. Let's finally get into the songs for the album. We have at least, technically, it's 9 songs here, but really, it's only 8 full songs with one intro, which is basically titled "Intro: A Duty Dance with Death," and it's a 1 minute and 55 minute or so instrumental, which basically which I'll get into a little bit about that as well. But really, with just the overall fact that it's 9 songs, it clocks around at least the length of 42 minutes and 14 seconds. So, of course, with the 9 songs here, again, the aforementioned intro, A Duty Dance with Death, against parentheses, Mayday, We Rule the Night, the title track, Limpieza de Sangre, hope I pronounced that correctly, which is Spanish for blood cleansing. And then, of course, we get into Alone, Highway Blues, Sajeska, and then finally ending with No Hope. So there's at least your 8 full songs with, of course, the one intro. Now, let me get into at least, I would guess, I guess really, what do I really start with? Do I start with my sort of recollections, just my overall, just the years I've spent listening to the album, my history surrounding this album, or do I just start with just the overall, just to give you a really good, better idea about the album in general, and so on? Do I start with that, or do I start with my history? Which, well, probably would be a better idea to actually start off with my history surrounding the album here before I really get into the music, because it's a better segue for that. So I don't know how long that this is actually going to be pushing it. We're probably almost, close to 6 minutes here, maybe 7 minutes. So we're kind of pushing it, but it's still decent timing. So let me see if I can briefly run through my recollection, my history surrounding just the time and the years I spent listening to Evil Nightmares by Ruler here. So, the history basically begins with, I've known about the album for a long time, at least up until basically 2015. Well, one of the first things I ended up buying, actually would be the second thing I believe I bought through Swords and Chains Records. Again, the guy who runs the Store Envy store, basically his little market on that site, storeenvy.com, which I've purchased plenty of things at least through that site anyways, because I got an account anyways. You have to have an account at least to also buy from again, from the guy who runs Swords and Chains and so on. But it was the second thing, and I don't want to run through the first thing I ever bought through there, but it was the second thing, and he had, at least, it was very much on sale. It was a used copy for $5, and I thought, you know what? It's a very cool artwork. I think that this would be a great sort of purchase, because I've been kind of curious about these guys for a long time. So let me kind of check out Evil Nightmares by Ruler here. So I purchased it and arrived, and again, it wasn't in the best of shape, but of course, at least I have spare cases around, spare jewel cases, so I was able to really give that at least a brand new coat of paint, I guess you could say. But though the jewel case I gave it was a slightly more older, slightly beat up kind of jewel case, which again, I wanted to kind of give it a little bit of a very vintage look to it, very much since the whole CD, the layout and everything, and the CD disc itself looks more like something like the old Polydor CDs, like the old Rainbow CDs, and how they all look like the layout and everything. It reminded me a lot of that, so I wanted to kind of give it that vintage look. So there we go. Either way, I finally get it in, and I end up listening to it. And since at the time I already began boosting up the YouTube channel, I figured since I really hadn't done a whole lot of album reviews at this point, I thought, what would be a good idea on actually doing an album review on Evil Nightmares by Ruler. That technically actually might make that one the third review on the channel. However, that's probably one of the first album reviews, actually. I think it would be that one. I would be certain. So That's probably the very first album review on this channel, and I went and looked back, and I did my research because, again, it's been that long since what, August or early August of 2015, and I would say that's probably one of the first real album reviews to be under the review series, because it was just new at the time. I only did 2 song reviews, basically, which were under the that series anyways. So this probably technically makes this one the first real album review on the channel. Don't take that with a grain of salt, because I think A Stone of This Eld by Witchblade might actually be one of the first ones. But it is around that same period, so it's really one of the earliest reviews really on the channel. And this is where I'm going to segue into my overall, I guess, new review of the album here, because I was never quite satisfied with that original review, and it just felt very shaky because, again, I was just beginning to do this. I was still very kind of, I wouldn't say camera shy, but I just was not quite, you know, at the level that I am at today, where I really can I feel more comfortable in front of the camera, and I can kind of come up with a lot more interesting verbiage and stuff, you know, that kind of really describe the overall album. And I've just been a lot more better these days. I feel a lot more different and more upbeat, and I think really I think this Album of the Week series really kind of gives me a really good sort of at least leeway. It gives me a much second chance at really giving certain albums that I probably had done earlier at one point in my channel, in my years, you know, in this doing YouTube and everything, and I probably can do a much more better job reviewing an album. So now it's finally come around to Evil Nightmares from Ruler, and this really kind of is very sentimental, and I had to do at least this Album of the Week video anyways, because of this was one of the very first reviews I ever did on this channel. So there's a lot of there's a lot of history surrounding me and this album, and of course the whole NastyMetalProductions channel here at YouTube. So let me get into it, since I can probably can describe this album better. Basically, the intro here again, which is titled, intro parentheses, A Duty Dance with Death. Again, a 1 minute and 55 instrumental. It begins with the sounds of, obviously it had to be, obviously it's the way to kind of picture the album cover here, but it really kind of almost sounds like somebody either loading up a tank is the best way. Like they're loading up some sort of machinery, like again, someone who's of course on the battlefield and is obviously trying to load it up and ready for war and everything. And as he does, the music that's playing over it is very, it is so familiar, but I can't remember what movie it is from. I can't think if it's Apocalypse Now. Could have been, though, just because of it had to be some sort of war movie, some of that kind of caliber. So that is what gets played, and again, it really does lengthen the overall intro here, and I think it kind of goes on a little bit too long. That's my only kind of nitpick on this one, because of it goes on. And again, kind of compared to another Italian band that I'm also a big fan of, that being Baphomet's Blood, they're a big offender of that one too, where they just really overuse certain intros, and it goes on for way too fucking long. And I think they kind of did the similar thing. I understand building an atmosphere and building up something that might be very epic to give the listeners, so, you know, kind of prepare them for what's going to come with the actual music. But sometimes it's better when you at least keep it within 30 seconds at least. Maybe 30 seconds, or at least maybe 40 seconds at least. 40 should be the maximum if you're going to do some sort of an intro instrumental type of deal before you head into the actual real song of the album. You don't want to try and just lean on the listener for too long, and again, it can wear off after time. There's plenty of videos already on YouTube that kind of dissects that whole thing and everything, and really gives out really good tips on what to kind of do in order to make your listener be more interested in what you're doing in terms of giving them an intro. You know, try and make sure that you keep them interested before they just decide to fucking skip it or just turn the whole thing off altogether. But I think that's kind of something that Ruler kind of did here. Again, very beginning and recording albums and coming up with songs, but I think this one could have been chopped down to at least maybe 30 or 40 seconds, and I think it wouldn't have hurt any of the album to begin with. It wouldn't have hurt it. That's my overall real nitpick of the actual album itself. Other than that, when we get into the actual song Mayday, which is not a cover of the Gamma song, again, we don't get that. But when you do get the real first taste of this album here with Mayday, you can definitely tell they are obviously huge fans of Iron Maiden. That's definitely one thing you can take away from, and it is definitely a good song nonetheless. It's very much typical of the new wave or traditional heavy metal movement because of course, this is during the sort of prime years of the new wave or traditional heavy metal movement, where everybody was a lot more in sync with the movement. Everybody was basically in all of its hysteria and everything. Everybody was just wrapped around it. Where it was like either Enforcer during this time period, or Skullfist, White Wizard, or Ram, and I know there's probably a few other bands I might be also not mentioned. Maybe Bullet might probably belong in that one. There's just so many of the whole, the whole new wave or traditional heavy metal movement was just in full swing in this year of 2012. And this album, again, it's pretty much typical of that time, but it is one of the, I would say, probably one of my overall favorites of this period, because there's really some, again, they may definitely seem to somehow ape a bit of Iron Maiden's classic sound and maybe some other new wave or British heavy metal bands and everything, but besides the fact that Mattia Baldoni obviously comes from the school of Yngwie Malmsteen and Ritchie Blackmore of just hard rock / heavy metal guitar playing or shredding. He does come from that, and it really does show in songs like, for example, like La Piazza di Sangre, Alone, Highway Blues, and We Rule the Night, and so on, and Evil Nightmares. And Suggestka, they really show that kind of, his sort of guitar playing really shows a lot in those songs. For example, where I really can draw the comparisons to a guy like Yngwie Malmsteen, of course, not other than a legend like Ritchie Blackmore. But as far as Yngwie Malmsteen is concerned, this is less Yngwie Malmsteen of Steeler or his solo stuff. This is more of Yngwie circa Alcatraz, again, the No Parole from Rock and Roll album, where it's really less about showing off and just to showing like how fast you play, how talented you are and everything, but more about how talented you are in the songwriting department. And that really kind of shows a lot more. Like, he definitely listened to a lot of that Alcatraz album, and maybe the first two Rising Force albums and everything, probably a little bit of those, but for the most part, it's definitely the Alcatraz album. And that's definitely really apparent in songs like Alone and Highway Blues, where he really kind of takes a lot of that type of sound and really kind of goes along with it. But again, his playing is very much in that sort of same vein, and it worked for the album. It really does. It gives it a slightly authentic feel, besides the production having a more authentic 80s sound to it anyways. But also Daniele DFE Valentini, he does have a very high register voice. He is very melodic at times, but at the same time, he does have a little bit of a slight grit and edge to his voice. Even though when he's hitting the real high falsetto voice, again, that was a really big typical thing of, and a trait almost of the whole new wave or traditional heavy metal movement, where everyone was trying to see if they can sound just like maybe Rob Halford or everyone else from the 1980s, maybe like Midnight from Crimson Glory. Everyone was trying to sound almost like any of those classic metal singers of that year, or again, of the 1980s. But he does fine. Again, it is very much European sounding, and I think it fits the overall vibe of the album. It fits the songs, and he does have a very good range nonetheless. It might be nasally to some, but I think it gives it a very authentic feel. So that's all I can say there. Again, just plenty of good songs here. Evil Night, the title track in itself, is one of my absolute favorites. This one really kind of has a straight-up new wave or British heavy metal feel to it that's less Iron Maiden, but sounds more like, let's say, a band like Chariot, for a really obscure reference. Something off, again, like, was it the song Vigilante off the Warrior album? That really kind of reminds me a little bit of that song there, and it has that feel to it, and it's a great track. Probably the closest to more of a really more speed metal song besides maybe Rerule the Night and so on. But there is at least something with the song alone. It is probably the album's real true ballad, but it's more of a really... It's more in the ballad of let's say the classic Deep Purple songs, like for example the more blues-based songs from Deep Purple, like something like When a Blind Man Cries or something like that, you know, something you probably would have expected off of like Fireball or Machine Head, that kind of ballad. And this is where a lot of his Richie Blackmore influence really is shown on this one. It's really in sort of the mostly the first real vocal parts of the song where he really kind of plays a lot of sort of Blackmore as blues stuff and everything. And again, it's more of a bluesier ballad than really a typical kind of, oh, I gotta make something that's very similar to like Judas Priest or Dio, or even let's say some American bands, you know, and such and such, like Dokken, you know, less like that, but more like, again, classic 70s type of blues-based ballads, that kind of style. I mean, you know, it does have, again, the very Alcatraz, you know, Yngwie kind of stance to it. It works, and it makes it great. Highway Blues, though, kind of continues this sort of almost boogie kind of rock in a way, because that's what it is. It's kind of a boogier kind of track, something, again, you would expect from maybe classic Deep Purple or Rainbow, and maybe, of course, maybe classic Dio, maybe, just that sort of period, like maybe like Elf. But it's a lot more, in a way, new wave or British heavy metal style type of boogie track, too. Just more classic like that. And again, I mean, like for another good example would be White Spirit. That type of sound. And it's very much apparent on Highway Blues, and this is where, again, he shows a lot more of the Richie Blackmore style playing. Or, since we're going to make more comparison to White Spirit, Yannick Gers. That type of style, and it works. There's just plenty of great tracks on this album that I think is very good. Sejeska definitely goes for a lot of the classic Iron Maiden feel, even the way it begins. This is more like classic Bruce Dickinson era Iron Maiden than like Paul Di'Anno era Iron Maiden, which this sound does kind of have, but more like, let's say if a guy like Bruce Dickinson was singing over it instead of just Paul Di'Anno's very raspy, gritty kind of voice. That type of feel. But suggested this kind of pull off a little bit of slightly pirate metal aspects to this one. Something that almost reminds me a little bit like Running Wild. It's a little bit towards the song, middle part. And then that's about it. But still, for the most part, it is very much that sort of 80s period Iron Maiden song that probably wouldn't have been completely out of place, maybe off of Power Slave or Peace of Mind. That kind of period there, and less like Somewhere in Time or Seventh Son of a Seventh Son period, you know, less of that. Or even less like modern day Iron Maiden, like basically Brave New World and so on. Less of that, more classic mid-80s period of Iron Maiden. That sort of period. So it's great. No Hope, of course, ends the album, adds again a straight up rocker in its own right. Again, you can tell they really love the sort of that period of Iron Maiden in a way, and I think they continue it. But the thing is, this comes off less like being a copycat and more taking that kind of inspiration, but kind of putting their spin on it and maybe expanding on top of it, especially if maybe at times almost sound like if a guy like Yngwie Malmsteen was probably a member of Iron Maiden than, let's say, your typical Ritchie Blackmore, which I think Yannick Gers comes off like almost a Ritchie Blackmore type of guitar player playing Iron Maiden than like Yngwie and everything. Someone who's a lot more of a more neoclassical style shredder. That's kind of the feel that I get off this one. Again, a crossbreed between the first album from Alcatraz and sort of the classic Killers to Power Slave era of Iron Maiden. That sort of combination, and it's really cool and interesting, and it makes things a lot more interesting to listen to. So there we go. That's pretty much my overall basically review or overview of Evil Nightmares here. There's some great songs on here nonetheless. So feels great to finally get a much more coherent review of this album than what it was and what I originally had on this channel. So it's all fantastic. There we go. So after Evil Nightmares is released, they do follow up a year later with the album Rise of Power, which is how I was introduced to Ruler, but I don't think I ever heard a song off of it. I'm still looking for a copy anyways of that one. Finally, they released their third album, Descent into Hades, in 2019. Definitely several years after Rise to Power. And of course, right now, we probably haven't heard anything else from these guys, but I think we might still, because they have never split up, and they are just active. They are still active to this day. And there has been some lineup changes here and there in 2014, Paolo Pantagia ended up leaving the band, and of course, drummer, Rosario Acaro, ended up leaving the band, and eventually they pretty much got replaced by Steve Bianco and Marco Negrino. So that's pretty much your lineup, I would say, for the Descent into 80s albums. I guess those two members probably made their album debut on Descent into Hades. So there we go. That's about it, folks. Again, if you have been very much interested in the Ruler, you probably have listened to these guys, or maybe have heard Evil Nightmares. Again, it has reached its 10th anniversary. You might be inspired of probably pulling this album out if you have it in your collection. So if you have at least re-pulled this album out, or are going to, or you have at least had somewhat history surrounding this album, again, use probably, again, whatever you did, again, if you actually are familiar with this album, again, whether you have any thoughts, whether it be positive or negative, you can leave them in the comments section below. But that's only if you at least have heard Evil Nightmares by Ruler. If you haven't, and this might have piqued your interest in the band, it shouldn't be that difficult, but it has gone up in price in a way. And if you're willing to pay, let's say, 20 bucks or 30, oof. Hopefully you end up finding this one cheap somewhere if you're living in Europe and you end up finding it in like a used city bin somewhere, whether you make your trips to maybe even Italy or Spain. If you end up seeing in one of those used CD bins, and if it's for a really cheap price, pick it up. If you somehow end up coming across a used copy of this album in the wild here in the United States, or maybe even Canada, you probably should pick it up and give it a listen. Maybe somebody on eBay might give you a break and maybe might be selling this one for maybe roughly around the same price that I had purchased for this one about 7 years ago. But if you still can't, and if you're probably just gonna want to listen to it, it should be on YouTube. Shouldn't be that difficult to find anyways on YouTube to listen to. So I think it's definitely worth checking out. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.